Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Yes, part two. Zain said that this was going to be the biggest episode of the MMA Outsiders, and he was not joking. But wait, Zain's not here with me. No, who is that to my right? To my right is Dylan Rush, best up-and-coming journalist in the MMA media sphere on Cageside Press. Dylan, thanks so much for joining me this time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the great introduction, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Off the air, Dylan and I are getting to know each other a little bit more. Obviously, Dylan has been on the show before, but he's pretty close to Zain, and I didn't know until talking with Dylan just now, both from the New York area, both Yankees fans, New York sports teams. So Dylan and I are on a on a good rapport so far. So yes, obviously, Zain, if you didn't tune in for part one, Zain was with me for part one. We did all the breakdown of the July 29th madness going on with 291, the Bellator, the Spence Crawford fight. But we're here for part two, here to talk about the news elements, everything that we've had over the past couple of weeks, because obviously Zain and I didn't have a show last week, took that week off. But Dylan is here for a really important reason, because he does have the top story that we are going to talk about. Before I get into any of that, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network, including every episode of the MMA Outsiders, every Tough Enough stream that we do, and so much more. Follow us across social media at MMA Outsiders ETV. Yes, that does include on the new X app, because we can't say Twitter anymore, I guess. Thanks, Elon. Again, to my right, my guest this week, Dylan Rush. You can follow him at Rush MMA 11 and Cageside Press. I'm Tom Bando. You can find my work over at Fansided MMA, as well as with the Professional Fighters League. Obviously, next week is the start of the Professional Fighter League playoffs. So I will be on top of the PFL website for all that. And you can find my work over at Thomas J. Albano. And make sure to follow the network at ETV Network all across the social media platforms. All right. Going to get right into it. Obviously, we got a lot of fight now to talk about. Islam versus Oliveira 2 is going to be a thing. Dricus du Plessis not going to be ready in time for 293, as I suspected weeks ago. And they're going to run with Sean Strickland. Conor involved in the news. Nate Diaz making a tease. The light heavyweight title's vacant. But I want to start with Dylan's story that he broke very recently on Monday night for Cageside Press. Zain and I talked about this at the start of part one yesterday. Bellator is pushing to have Bellator 300 in October, potentially in San Diego. Okay, so those of you sleeping under the rock, you're probably saying, it's just an event announcement. What's the big deal? The big deal is there has been talk for months now about a potential sale of Bellator. Zain and I have covered this for months about Viacom and where they might sell this to. Obviously, the PFL has been the big front runner. And the long-standing rumor, which Dylan, I'll ask you about, we made mention of that Instagram account, Zain and I, that posted a rumor about Bellator 299 in Ireland in September probably being it. Your report, however, is that it's pretty much business as usual with Bellator. They're going for Bellator 300 in October, potentially not in their backyard because technically that's San Jose, but near it in San Diego. But there is still that possibility that this could be the final Bellator card ever. So I guess the first thing I want to know is, give us a little bit of a behind-the-scenes peek. Obviously, if you can't reveal your sources, oh well, but just, how did you pick up on this? And it seems like you've been following, just like the rest of us, this potential storyline for the second half of the year of what the fate of Bellator MMA could be.
Definitely, man. Yeah, I'm not one to break news. I don't break news too often, even though I do, sometimes I know some things, but, I hold it close. But this time I got some very reputable sources. Like there's been I've heard from a million different people what's going on, this rumor, that rumor. And I never commented on it because, it's hearsay. He said, she said, but I did get some like concrete stuff that Bellator 300 It's not definite, but it is likely. They're trying to make it happen. They're reaching out to fighters. They're trying to do, the matchmakers are doing their thing. Bellator's doing their thing. There have been talks of Ryan Bader and Linton Vassell headlining the card, main event, heavyweight championship fight, a fight that a lot of fans have been anticipating for a long time. That would be a great one. Of course, Patchy Mix and Sergio Pettis, interim champion. That one makes sense. It's likely to be on that card if this does happen. And then another one that wasn't included in the article, but not as definite as the other two, but Jeremy Kennedy, he's the number one contender for that featherweight strap. Patricio Pitbull, of course, one of the all-time Bellator greats, the incumbent, the champion. That one could be added as well, considering Patricio Pitbull's name value, especially considering the fact that it could be the last event ever. Who better to be on that last card than Patricio Pitbull? So from what I'm hearing, when I published this article, it was like 75% chance that this Bellator 300 card happens. From what I'm hearing since publishing the article, my Rush MMA calculator has the event being at 90% likely to happen. I think I would be willing to put my eggs in the basket. I think Bellator 300 is going to go down. I think San Diego is like probably going to be the place, but who knows? It could be somewhere else. But if I had to bet life on the line, I think it's going to be Bellator 300 in San Diego. Yeah, and it would be a very exciting event. It was Stand 'Em Up who put out the report that said Bellator 299 would possibly be the last one. And I'm not like going to say he was incorrect or anything because he said possibly. He didn't say it's going to be. He said possibly. And for all I know, well, there's a chance he's right. There's a chance it could be. I don't think it will be. But yeah, a lot of publications, a lot of outlets, a lot of accounts on social media picked that story up. We're running with it. That 299 was probably going to be it. But I'm here to say that I don't think it will be.
No, I don't think so too. And if this really is going to be the end for Bellator, you don't want to end on a 299. You want to end on something like a 300. And if this really is going to be the last Bellator card, you are right, because obviously this is a different kind of comparison, MMA to professional wrestling. But you think of like that last WCW Nitro that had all the championships defended, and that's what you need for something like Bellator 300, especially if it's going to be the last one. You need Bader. You need Pitbull. You need another title fight after that. You need to really stack that card, especially if this is really going to be the end of an era. Now, I'll reiterate something that I said during part one. Obviously, Zain, my Marvel co-host, as you guys know, Bellator Rankings Committee member, he has heard nothing about this. He reached out to Bellator when they first started that little story about all the profiles of the Bellator people that were showing up on the UFC website, as well as Fedor and Jose Canseco of all people. But he pretty much got a no comment from Bellator. And me on the PFL end, I just write results for them for their website. I have no inside information on a potential PFL Bellator sale. I am as in the dark and looking for answers just as everybody else is in the media sphere and the MMA sphere is looking for answers. But I just really think of it. And I mean, I was following MMA when I was a teenager, and Strikeforce had just been purchased by the UFC and eventually ended up folding during my freshman year of college. And I wasn't a member of the MMA media, though, however. So this, to me, kind of feeling similar to that, feeling similar to around 06, 07, making the comparison Dan and I did yesterday about when Pride. And it feels like if this really is the last Bellator event, there is kind of that somber feeling about it being the end of an era.
Definitely, man. And I believe, I didn't say it concretely in the article, but I believe PFL will be the ones to purchase Bellator when it's all said and done. I think that will be announced in the next 2 months, I'd say. I'm not definite on that, just like nobody's definite on anything regarding this. I mean, like, not only a few people in the world really know what's going to happen, how it's going to look. But I will say that if PFL does purchase Bellator, it is more than likely that they would cut maybe 70-75% of the Bellator roster, meaning that they would keep 20, 25, maybe 30%, who knows the exact figure, but like, less than half of the Bellator roster would be coming over to PFL. The rest would become free agents, which is unfortunate. You never want to see, a bunch of fighters unemployed looking for work. But Yeah, I mean, there was reports that Vadim Nemkov would go to one. There's all these different reports. You get like the UFC profiles. That seemed to me like a non-story. After doing some deep digging, after Nolan King's report and Nolan King saying that those profiles have been around since March, it doesn't have to do with the sale. And then Jose Canseco being involved. I mean, that kind of just threw it all for a loop. But yeah, I think that what it's heading towards is PFL buying Bellator, taking like 30% of the roster, and the rest going to UFC, one, Bellator, regional promotions, and whatnot, all the rest of them. So
Yeah, well, originally when I saw those profiles start to pop up on the UFC website, I kind of got curious, and then I saw Nolan King's report. I saw a report from my editor at Fansided, Amy Kaplan, and then I saw the Jose Canseco profile popped up. I'm like, yeah, this is a non-story completely.
yeah,
But
yeah,
but it did add to that fuel to the fire of that something is going on in which Bellator is kind of that this pretty much could be the end. Now, I I like how you brought up what your expectation is about PFL and what they're going to do, because Dan and I talked about this yesterday too. Because I feel like on one end, I would like to still see the idea of PFL running two promotions, a la what the UFC originally did with Strikeforce, what they originally planned to do with Pride, in spite of all that, how the circumstances of Pride ending. But just because more promotions out there, I said it yesterday, I'll say it again, more promotions out there means more opportunities for these fighters. You want all the fighters, you don't want anybody being a free agent facing unemployment. And we already talked about the tough circumstances that fighters deal with in terms of fighter pay and the structure and all that. And you want more opportunities for these guys to fight. That being said, the PFL, we know their structure, this regular season, the tournament, that they're not going to go away from that. So if they're not going to keep Bellator and they're not going to run it as a separate promotion, then obviously it seems like they'll take, just as you said, take what they'll take, and then the rest are going to go, which is unfortunate. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if they take a little more that people are expecting, because they do have a super fight division that they need to build up. And you think of, Ryan Bader. I mean, if he retains against Linton Vassell, then there's a couple of different things you could do with it. Zan and I were talking the other day. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts it would be. Dylan, on one hand, you could do a PFL Bellator cross promotion super card thing where you have the champions of the divisions of Bellator and the champions of the divisions of PFL for 2023 facing off. Obviously, I know PFL and Bellator don't share every single division, but you could have the champs face off, or you could have something along the lines of, like I said, absorbing some fighters for that super fight division. Ryan Bader, especially if he does win one of those kind of super cross promotional super fights. Francis Ngannou has been needing an opponent for his PFL MMA debut. I think that would be an interesting first fight for that promotion.
yeah. I've seen Bader talk about that in the past when Ngannou was talking about when there were some talks about him meeting with One and with Bellator and these, and Bader was like, he'd want that fight, and with Ngannou guaranteeing in the PFL that any opponent he faces will make $2 million. I'm pretty sure any heavyweight would take that fight, regardless of what the outcome may be. I mean, $2 million is $2 million. I'll step in with maybe, I don't know, but I think I'd step in for $2 million to get knocked out. I'd probably die, so maybe I wouldn't do it. But a heavyweight that's been training their whole life should probably want to do that, take that opportunity. It's an exciting time to be a combat sports fan, Tom, because there are some negatives with the possibly fighters becoming free agents and stuff, but the possibilities are endless for what PFL does with this. If they do go ahead and purchase Bellator, the cross promotion events, the combining the rosters, the keeping it separate, all these different things, the super fight division, the tournament, the regular season tournament format, it doesn't seem feasible that they could take the whole roster of Bellator and continue with this season format. It doesn't seem like that would make much sense, or I don't think that would be possible. But yeah, I don't have as much insight on what will happen if they do purchase it. But as I said, I think I like your ideas, though. Don't get me wrong. I think the cross promotion event, like the champions versus champions, like that would be honestly my preferred. Like that would be the best thing. That would be the coolest thing. That would be the biggest event. I think that would be like, if you put that event on, PFL champions versus Bellator champions, on the same night as a UFC pay-per-view, I think some people would be surprised at how many people are watching the PFL versus Bellator, because that I personally would be more interested in that as a combat sports fan than just a normal UFC pay-per-view. But like I said, to go back, I do think what is most likely, and all likely, the most likely scenario would be PFL purchasing Bellator, merging promotions, and keeping a certain percentage of the roster, and the rest, go to the other promotions. But if they did do maybe like one cross promotion event before that, or like, I don't know, there's a bunch of different things they could do, man. Even things that we haven't even thought of, we haven't even we can't even picture right now. So I'm so excited. I do want clarity. I know all the fighters want clarity, but all the fans want clarity too. I just want to know, all of us just want to know what's happening, what's going to happen. And I'm sure that news will come out soon. But right now it's been pretty fun to speculate.
Right. Well, do you think Bellator is just trying to keep this? I talked about this with Zain yesterday, this business as usual kind of approach, because it sounds like the way that they had addressed it in your report, it's like, oh no, everything is fine. We're going to have Bellator 300 in October, and then we're going to have a Bellator 301 and a Bellator 302. And I kind of understood where Zain was going with that. If you are a Bellator MMA fan, that's kind of, it may not be the truth, but it's also the kind of stuff you want to be consoled. Like, everything, you think of, obviously it's not the case of that meme where the dog is sitting there at the table and everything's on fire, but you want to be told that everything is fine.
Yeah, 100%. Because I mean, if everyone knew, if they came out today, Bellator came out today and was like 300 is going to be our last event. I mean, on one hand, it would bring more eyes to it, everyone knowing, oh, it's the last event, like we should watch it, it's the last event. But on the other hand, it's like all the fights, definitely not meaningless by any means, but it's just like the fights would have a little bit less meaning, a little bit less implications. There would be a little bit less excitement surrounding like who's going to be the champion, knowing that come November 1st, there will be no Bellator champions. Then again, I was talking to Mads Burnell, and I was like, I think it would be cool. He's a Bellator featherweight, for those that don't know. I think he's ranked like 5 or 6. I think it would be cool to be the eternal Bellator champion. Like, say Patchy Mix and Sergio fight and unify the straps. Say, for example, Patchy wins and then the organization folds. I mean, Patchy Mix is the Bellator bantamweight champion forever. I think that's pretty cool. I don't know how the fighters would feel about that. But yeah, if I was Bellator, I'm doing exactly what they're doing. I'm keeping everything under wraps. Like the meme you said, just like business as usual, like everything's fine. And when the time comes to release the news, you release the news. And it's unfortunate because like it seems like a lot of fighters in Bellator aren't as much in the know as they'd like to be. Mm-hmm. But then again, it's like, how many fighters are on that roster? If Bellator puts out a memo to 400 fighters or whatever, how many fighters, couple hundred fighters, that this is what's happening, chances are, more than likely, almost definitely, one fighter is going to tell a friend or a fan or a teammate or this, that, and the news is going to get out within 24 hours. So it makes sense that Bellator can't go tell all the fighters and telling them this is exactly what's happening, blah, 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 because, it would get out pretty quickly. So I think Bellator is doing everything right now. And I think that if they're able to put together a 300th event, it would be the best for the fighters, for the fans, for the organization. Let's go out on a bang. 15-year run, remarkable run, so many different champions, so many great fight nights. I would love to see. I don't want to see Bellator come to an end, but if it is going to come to an end, if it is imminent, if it's inevitable, I would love to see them go out on a bang with a big card with numerous championship fights. Why 2? Why not 3? Why not 4?
Well said. I agree. One last point here, kind of two questions in one, stuff that Zain and I talked about. Number one, do you think if this really is the last Bellator card and it's Bellator 300, if they do it in San Diego, is it a bit of a missed opportunity because you could have done it in the backyard in San Jose, or you could have done it at the Garden? They've done the Garden before in New York City a couple of times. And number two, would it be bad if Bellator chose to do it at some point as kind of with Bellator 300 as kind of a pay-per-view with all the, such a stack card where you could plug it in? I don't know, you could plug it in on October 21st at night after the UFC pay-per-view, or the week before it, or in that week between the Ngannou Fury fight and 295. So that was, I think, is November 4th. So I guess those are my two questions. Is it a missed opportunity to not do it in New York or San Jose? And could you see Bellator 300 be a pay-per-view if they stack the card?
I'll answer the second one first. I haven't given it much thought, but like I like what you're saying. I think that it makes perfect sense, especially if it's like 3 championship fights. Make it a pay-per-view. I think fans are gonna, especially if it's being billed as a last event, one last show, 3 championship fights. I think make it a pay-per-view. Why not? I think they'd do some serious pay-per-view buys. And then for the first one, I'm completely biased as a New Yorker like yourself. I think I've been saying to Bellator, I've been talking to people for months now, before I even thought 300 would be the last event, saying like Bellator 300, New York, Madison Square Garden, make it happen. It should be in New York. It should be in New York. So I've been saying that since I think like May or June. And let me tell you this, Tom. I was told that San Diego is one of the 3 locations, the likeliest, but I was not told what the other 2 locations are. For all I know, the other 2 locations are exactly what San Jose and Madison Square Garden. I don't think it's too likely Madison Square Garden, but I'm, as a New Yorker, never say never. I'm hoping for it. So I think it would be cool. I don't know if it's a missed opportunity per se, because I do love me some San Diego. It's one of my favorite cities in the country. But if it were up to me, it would be in Madison Square Garden at the Mecca.
Could you just imagine, like within the span of 2, 3, 4 weeks, the last Bellator ever and UFC 295 both at the Garden? That would be amazing. Maybe even the PFL championships that month too.
Yeah. At the end of November, yeah, that would be a crazy month stretch for Madison Square Garden for New York combat sports fans, man. I'm all for it. I would love that.
I would have to find a way to go to some of those somehow. But yeah, thank you for that story, Dylan. I think you did an excellent job with it. Shout out to you and Cageside Press. Hopefully, within the next month or 2, we get more of these developments about what the future of Bellator MMA is going to be. And if it's really going to go out, I hope it goes out with bang.
Definitely. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. But I agree 100%.
All right. Other headlines to go over here in the next 40 or so minutes here on the MMA Outsiders. We begin that other part with some fight announcements that we need to catch up on. So, turns out Charles Oliveira is going to fight Islam Makhachev after all. We had speculated that was going to be the fight. Dana White kind of indicated as such, as Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira, after Oliveira beat Dariush about a month or 2 ago. So we were going to get this lightweight title rematch. Then in the International Fight Week, we get to hear these things. Charles Oliveira does an interview with the translator, and it sounds like he's saying, oh, I'm not going to be ready for October, but maybe November or December. And obviously Islam, who has succeeded Khabib in being the headline guy over in Abu Dhabi. Ali obviously making a statement on social media. He's going to fight in October. I have mentioned in a previous episode, I think it might have been our last episode a couple weeks ago, where I said, Abu Dhabi has some control over that show. That's not just the UFC. They're going to want Islam in the main event. And so we had the tease of maybe Volk, his minor surgery might, he could fill in if possible. But turns out we're still going to get this fight after all in Abu Dhabi. Plus, Paulo Costa gets pulled from this week's 291 card to compete against Hamzat Chimaev in the co-main event. So I think you got a solid main and co-main. But yeah, just funny, crazy turn of events for how this card is now going to play out. And Dylan, I just want to get your thoughts on it.
Well, my first thought when it was announced was like, what the heck was DC Daniel Cormier smoking when he put out a tweet or a statement that said like fans are going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Was it a joke? It must have been a joke. Or is he just saying that like, was he under the impression that like every single fan wanted Volk Islam? Don't get me wrong. Volk Islam, I still want that fight. Volk Islam 2, that is. I think fight could have gone either way. I think in terms of MMA scoring, Islam 1-3-2. I think in terms of 25-minute fight, if rounds aside, if it was just a 25-minute fight, I think Alexander Volkanovski won the fight, especially ending that fight with that last minute in that dominant position, raining down the ground and pound. I think Alexander Volkanovski, if that's a street fight, he won the fight. But, of course, that doesn't matter nearly as much as winning the 3-2. So, of course, all credit goes to Islam. That's a good victory right there. First title defense. But Charles Oliveira, I mean, who doesn't love Charles Oliveira? The fans love him. Everyone loves him. He has this energy about him. He has this aura. Like, he's what you want in a UFC superstar. He's exactly – I don't think Dana White – I don't think the UFC ever saw this coming. When Michael Chandler was set to fight Charles Oliveira for that vacant lightweight title, all of the buildup, all of the promotion was dedicated to Michael Chandler. Charles Oliveira, he didn't speak English. He wasn't getting any spotlight. He was He was an underdog to win that fight. He knocks out Michael Chandler. I think he shocked a lot of people, including like some powerful people over there in the UFC. And now what is he? Now he's like one of the top stars in the promotion, one of the top guys on social media, like in terms of followers. So it's crazy to see how he's risen. And Islam, of course, he's had high expectations from the start. He's like LeBron James when he was 16 on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Like everyone said, even when Islam was still fighting Bobby Green and Dan Hooker, like he was destined. Like people were saying he is going to be the next champion. He will be the successor of Khabib. And up to this point, he has delivered on all of his promises, all of his manager's promises, and all of, Dagestan, the people of Dagestan's hopes and dreams. So this was the fight to make, especially with Volk being injured. This was definitely the fight to make. Islam Charles 2 in the main event. I think that it's going to be a totally different fight. I think one of the craziest parts of fighting that the average fan doesn't pay any mind to, and even a lot of just people within the sport outside of the fighters, they don't think about too often, is the fact that you could be the best fighter in the world. You could be John Jones. You could do an 8-week, a 10-week, a 12-week training camp and feel perfect every single day. You could have the best camp of your life, best weight cut, best rehydration. And the fact of the matter is we're all humans, Tom. And you can wake up that day on fight day not feeling yourself. You could wake up that day feeling sluggish, feeling this, that, or third, whatever it may be. And you could just not have the night that you were hoping to have, And I feel, and Charles said that that's what it was for him. And like, I kind of feel like he's right. I mean, it's not taking anything away from Islam. It was a dominant, amazing performance for Islam Makhachev, but it just didn't seem like the same Charles in there that we just saw against Dariush. It didn't seem like the same Charles in there that we saw against Gaethje or even Chandler. People we're humans. Those nights happen. And I think the same thing, Dariush said the same thing about himself versus Charles recently. I don't think that was Dariush's night. He came out, he just wasn't seeing things the way he does. So that's why I think this is a totally brand new fight. I don't think they're both, of course, going to make adjustments. They're going to watch that fight a million times if they haven't already, changing a lot of things. But I think that fight, if Charles is right, and if Charles really wasn't there that night, if it wasn't the same Charles, I think that fight goes out the window and it's a totally brand new ball game going into this one. So that one is going to be one of the fights of the year, in my opinion, regardless of how it goes, whether Charles gets to finish, Islam gets to finish. I think it's going to be a finish. That's one fight that, like, I do not see that one going the full 5 rounds.
I love how you mentioned it as a fight of the year candidate, because we're just coming off of a UFC pay-per-view card a few weeks ago that had multiple fight of the year candidates. We have another potential one coming up on Saturday with Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier. And you're right, this one very well could also be a potential fight of the year candidate. I'm not so much on optimistic of you with Charles Oliveira. I think it's going to be a much more of a competitive fight, but I still think that Islam has just a little bit more in the tank. I think what interests me here is just how we got that path to now this finally being official, because we thought it was official, then it wasn't, and it looked like he wasn't gonna fight, and then all of a sudden Islam versus Oliveira 2 is made, done, signed, sealed, delivered. And I guess my thought process is, did Charles Oliveira kind of twist the UFC's arm a little bit when you consider the other thing we're going to talk about with Dricus du Plessis not being ready for the Sydney card? And it wasn't until UFC 290 where we got the official announcement about Jones versus Stipe. And I mean, we'll talk about Conor in just a little bit, but it's July 25th when we're recording this, July 26th when this airs. We still have no information about a Conor Chandler fight being official. So it's kind of like the UFC has set itself up for an extremely good second half of the year, but they needed some of these fights to be official. So my thought process is, did he twist the UFC's arm a little bit for more money or something?
I think it's possible.
Because now all of a sudden this... Good. I'm glad you see it my way, because I feel like this is a fight that needed to be made, and then Volk undergoes the arm surgery. I know the speculation after Volk announced that was, okay, the BMF title winner is going to just fit it right into the October title fights. And I'm just thinking, the kind of war that Poirier and Gaethje are going to have, you really think one of them is going to be ready for October? No. So it's like, what do you do in that situation? Do you put Fiziev in the title fight? Is the UFC gonna UFC and put Conor McGregor in the title fight? Like, there's this is a fight that needed to happen. It absolutely needed to happen. As you mentioned, this is another fight of the year candidate. These two are some of the best grappling experts, not in the UFC, let alone that lightweight division. They're two of the best, if not the two best lightweight fighters on the planet. I feel like this is a fight that has needed to happen. I think Oliveira is going to make it competitive. Do I think that he's going to necessarily win? I'm not as optimistic as you, but it's going to be a fun fight. And I'm glad that this fight is actually happening. And the Paulo Costa Khamzat Chimaev fight, that kind of like, I went a little wide-eyed and scratched my head at that. But I'm like, it's good to see Khamzat finally return to the cage. But Paulo Costa, I know he's been on again, off again. Like he signs a fight and then all of a sudden, no, he didn't. And we're finally going to get both these guys in there. And it's just, I kind of like it that, for Khamzat, this is a fight that's needed because there's all these questions, is he going to stay at welterweight? Is he going to go to middleweight? It seems like he's going to be fighting at middleweight now based on what Dana has said in the past. I'm interested to see what he looks like at middleweight. Obviously, we've seen it before, but he was making that run at welterweight. And now all of a sudden he's going to do the jump up after being away for a little while.
Yeah. I can't believe Chael said that. Chael said in April that Khamzat and Costa are going to fight at UFC 294 in Abu Dhabi in October. And he said the same thing about Charles. He said the winner of Charles Darius Islam. And he was spot on with both. And a lot of fans out there, they don't take his words too seriously. He says a lot of different things. But he was spot on with this one. So shout out to Uncle Chael Sonnen for that one, the bad guy. Listen, Khamzat and Costa. I think it's a very interesting fight. It's a very interesting stylistic matchup, and I see the odds. I don't know how much of you're in tune with the odds, with the gambling or the betting odds and stuff, but I see Khamzat as a 4-1 favorite or minus 400. Paulo Costa plus 330. I think it's a closer fight than that, man. I don't know if I tend to side with the underdog with the with Charles and Islam, but
I think Khamzat should be the favorite. That's a little high for this far out. I would decrease that by 100.
Minus 250, minus 275, maybe minus 300, but minus 400. It's like if you're a bettor, when you see Gilbert Burns, a former lightweight, touch his chin and send him crashing to the canvas, and Paulo Costa and the secret juice and the power that man holds in his fist, it's like, it's tough. And Paulo Costa, he's had good takedown defense in the past. I mean, I know Khamzat Chimaev is a different animal, and if Khamzat Chimaev gets on top of him, that might be curtains, but man, oh man, it only takes one. Anyone has a puncher's chance. Plus 330 for Paulo Costa in this fight. It might be the bet to bet if you're a betting man.
As long as he's not full of wine when he goes in there with Khamzat Chimaev, it should be a fun fight.
100%.
All right.
Wait, back to what you were saying real quick. Neither of them have fought in over a year now. Once this fight happens, neither of them have fought in over a year. I think it was back-to-back pay-per-views. They fought in UFC 278 back last August for Paulo versus Luke Rockhold, and then the following one with Khamzat and Kevin Holland. It's been so long. Both these guys have been on the show for so long, so I'm so excited to see both of them come back competing against each other.
Fair enough. Also, we had UFC 293 1 month before that in Sydney. And it turns out Dricus du Plessis is not going to be cleared in time to compete UFC 293. And so Israel Adesanya will remain on that card in Australia, obviously. But he will now defend against Sean Strickland, who's coming off the win over Abus Magomedov, the two guys that supposedly nobody wanted to fight, according to them and Dana White. And the winner of Adesanya versus Strickland will now be the one who will be mandated to fight Dricus du Plessis. I said it before on the show, Dylan, and I'll say it again. I really think the UFC part of the situation what I talked about before with Oliveira is because they shot themselves in the foot. They did not need to book a September Sydney show. I cannot believe they really thought that Whitaker or du Plessis was going to be ready in 9 weeks to fight Israel Adesanya. I think they were a little crazy thinking that. So I think by fighting Sean Strickland, I mentioned that as a possibility during the preview show, the last episode that we did, and I'm kind of glad the recap show that we did the last episode, and I think I'm kind of glad I mentioned that, and I'm kind of glad that feeling is exactly what's going to play out here, especially when you consider a controversial showdown in the cage after du Plessis beat Adesanya. Now, you can think of that controversy all that you want about crossing lines and such, But with a fight like that, you kind of need more hype for it. And you think about the push for UFC Africa that has been wanted ever since, Adesanya and Ngannou and Usman were all champions in the UFC. Adesanya right now is your last hope to get that. And Dricus du Plessis, I've told this story to him, but I don't know if you know, but du Plessis I've been following ever since I first got into the MMA media game because I originally worked at Fight Sports and they originally broadcasted the UFC Africa. And I saw Dricus du Plessis win the 2 UFC championships, go on to KSW, win that championship. And now here he is over in the UFC about to fight for a championship. That kind of fight, Adesanya du Plessis, needs to happen in Africa. It absolutely has to happen, especially now given the controversial build that you need more time to build that fight. And yes, it is a risk to put Adesanya in the octagon with Sean Strickland, but I am confident Izzy gets the win in Australia. And that just makes it all the more exciting for Adesanya and du Plessis to end up facing off in the future. I think the UFC kind of shot itself in the foot booking Sydney in Australia.
I completely agree with like pretty much every single thing you just said. I am excited though for this Israel Adesanya Sean Strickland fight, especially the build up. But the fight itself, even without the build up, can Sean Strickland do it? Most people don't think so. I don't know if he could with their styles, but I mean, man, oh man, the scenes in Sydney, Australia. If Sean Strickland goes in there and becomes champion, like,
oh god, there'll be a riot.
There'll be a riot. I think it would be good for the sport. I always think that I always think a big underdog defeating a champion would be good for the sport. It's just anything crazy, and I think that would be the craziest thing to happen this year. Honestly, I think that would be the craziest thing. Betting odds aside, whatever the odds will be, I think that would be the biggest upset in recent memory in the UFC.
More than Grasso Shevchenko?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, because of who they are. I don't know, like, if it was, like, in terms of, like, skill gap, if it's bigger upset, but, like, in terms of, like, the ramifications, in terms of, like, the virality of it on social media and just, like, Sean Strickland is a bigger name and, like, more popular than Grasso. Of course, Izzy is bigger than Shevchenko. So I think it would be the biggest upset, like, in I don't know how long. Let me say this. I got a question for you. I think that Dricus solidified that he deserves the title shot. Don't get me wrong. You go through Robert Whittaker, of course, Darren Till, the other opponents in the past, but you go through Robert Whittaker in the fashion that he did, he deserves the title shot, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And again, that being said, we've seen guys that deserve title shots take other fights. We saw Leon take like 2 more fights before the title shot. We see Bilal Muhammad still fighting, Beneil Dariush, all these people that deserve title shots. I'll just say it. I think if Izzy wins, defeats Strickland, which would probably be the likely scenario, I completely agree. Izzy, Dricus, fight to make, definitely in Africa. That's the place to do it. I think all of that makes complete sense. That being said, if Izzy fights in September, then the next time he fights will be when? Maybe January, maybe February, somewhere around that. If Dricus is good and healthy by September, maybe not to fight in September, but he's back to training full time in like a month or so, maybe 2 months. I don't know, man. Paulo and Hamzat are booked. Izzy and Strickland are booked. There is one guy that isn't booked at the top of the division. His name is Jared Cannonier. After the performance he put forth against Marvin Vettori, I know he's already gotten his title shot against Israel Adesanya. It didn't go his way. It wasn't a great fight. I wouldn't be as surprised as some to see them make Dricus versus Jared Cannonier.
The only reason, maybe it's a little bit of DDP bias on my part, I would feel that's BS is because he won a title limiter. He beat the former champion. And Whittaker, and with an emphatic finish. And Zain and I have talked about Robert Whittaker, Max Holloway. These are the quadruple A guys. They beat everybody else except the guy who's actually at the top. So I feel like du Plessis needs to get a championship fight, and I think he should be allowed to wait things out. So maybe that's just my kind of bias, but there is also.
I agree with you, though. I completely agree, and I think that the ball will be in his court. If I were to guess, I think that, like, I don't think the UFC, after what he just did and like the build-up and what happened with Izzy and
the fight hype, that you need the time for that.
100%. I think the ball will be in du Plessis' court, and I think if he's a smart man, which he probably is, he will wait it out. He will wait to fight Izzy and Strickland. I think that's the most likely scenario. I'm just throwing out the one other possibility. Not likely, but you know.
The other reason I was going to say that is another thing that's in I've talked about with somebody like Izzy Adesanya. Now that Alex Pereira is up at light heavyweight, I mean, he's run through this whole division. He's beaten Cannonier, beat Whitaker twice, beat Vettori twice. Granted, only one of them was a title fight, but still beat him twice. Izzy has basically run through everybody. DDP is the freshest face you have right now for a potential challenger.
Him and Strickland only two.
Right. And then so it's like, I mean, what's your plan if it's not DDP? Are you going to hope that Alex Pereira gets the light heavyweight title and then try to make the fifth fight between Izzy and Alex Pereira at light heavyweight instead?
No, I think you're completely right. I think that the UFC, especially as you phrase it, shot themselves in the foot with the Sydney card being so. I don't think they're going to risk I think it will be du Plessis versus the winner of this fight. I think you're right, and I don't think that they would risk another Dricus versus Cannonier, and then now they're not ready for Izzy again. Like, it's not going to happen again. But I the only reason I mentioned it at all was just because Jared Cannonier. I don't know. Is he ranked 1 in the division now? Is he ranked 2? I know he must be top 2 at this point, right? So
I can double check that right now.
Look it up real quick. Because and Paulo and Hamza, he's 4.
He's 4. For some reason, Pereira is still ranked as a middleweight.
Okay, well, we can forget Pereira for now, but who are the other two? Vettori can't be above.
Whitaker's still above.
And then so it's Izzy, Whitaker, Pereira, Cannonier?
It's Izzy, DDP,
Whitaker,
and then Cannonier.
That makes sense. So that makes sense. So I know they've already fought. Have they fought twice, Whitaker and Cannonier? I know they fought at least once. But maybe you make that fight next. I mean, I was just thinking in terms of Cannonier. I was at the MMA lab yesterday. I'm in Arizona. So Cannonier has been on my mind. And I was just thinking, like, who the heck does Cannonier fight? Because he's obviously, if they're doing Strickland Izzy, and they're doing Paulo Hamzat, and they're doing Dolidze Brunson, it doesn't.
Cannonier, I think, has only been made once, by the way.
Cannonier and who? What did you say?
Whitaker has only been made once, I think.
And Cannonier broke his arm in the first round. So maybe they make that fight. I think that's the fight to make then. Maybe you rematch that fight. That makes sense to me. And du Plessis waits for Izzy Strickland. And now I got some clarity on it. That makes sense.
And now that you mentioned deserving challengers, making me think of Magomed Ankalaev. And I mentioned UFC shooting its foot with Sydney. And I guess we just go to this story next. So the light heavyweight championship, I made a little video on the MMA Outsiders account a couple weeks ago when this news first broke, but we'll get the chance to talk it here very briefly. Jamahal Hill injured, suffering a leg injury. He's going to be out just like Yuri was. So just like Yuri was, he vacates the championship. The Pereira versus Yan fight this weekend, not for the championship. And so it begs the question of what to do. So I have said what the UFC should do is essentially make a tournament of sorts. The winner of this weekend's fight, especially if it's Jan Blachowicz, faces the winner of a Magomed versus Yuri fight that will be for the vacant championship as that winner's first title defense. But I guess knowing the UFC, they'll probably just make the winner of this weekend's fight versus Yuri Prochazka, because it seems like, in spite of the fact that Jan Blachowicz said that night in December that Magomed beat him, I know the judges ruled it a split draw, and people thought that Magomed Ankalaev, I'm one of those people, deserved to be the light heavyweight champion. He fell out of favor with the UFC, and we haven't heard anything since.
Yeah, it's freaking crazy, man. And for the record, I did watch that video you put out, the reaction to Jamahal Hill, his injury. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. This light heavyweight championship, what is it that has made it so cursed in recent years? I mean, first Yuri.
It's absolutely cursed.
John Jones goes, then Yuri, Glover retired, and then now Jamahal Hill, of course. I love what you just said. I mean, in a perfect world, the UFC would do that, and even announce it as like a tournament, because I love that. Bellator is so right in what they do in tournaments in MMA. Like, the UFC started with tournaments, with one night tournaments where people are fighting 3 times in a night. It's crazy how times have changed. But yeah, I mean, that makes way more sense to me, because Yuri and Magomed are
1-2. They are 1-2 in the rankings.
Okay, and they're the 2 most deserving of the belt right now, with Jamahal Hill gone, right? Jamahal Hill's out of the picture for right now. We can forget about him for right now. I think you do what you said. I think you do this fight, and you do Yuri versus Ankalaev as soon as possible, whenever they could get that done, September, October, and then winners fight for the title. Or is what you said? Is this what you said? Because I like this too. Yuri and Ankalaev for the belt, and then winner fights in the first title defense against the winner of this fight. That makes perfect sense to me.
And then whoever wins this little mini tournament gets to defend against Jamahal Hill. And then there's a solution.
I know your viewers probably like controversy, all these shows like First Take and Skip and Train. They all like to see people fight, but man, you're spitting right now. I completely agree with you. I don't know what to say. I think that makes complete sense to me.
I hope so. I'm glad you think that way. All right. Last 15 minutes here. Let's go through some quicker headlines. We got quite a lot of them over the next 15 minutes. Conor being investigated again. The cops investigating it. There's some TMZ video of him leaving a pub quickly. I actually have a statement from the pub that the news sources got. Subject to speculation, Mr. McGregor presented himself as a gentleman would when attending a family funeral. He was courteous, polite, and well-mannered to all our staff and members in communal areas. The time he was here, taking pictures, signing autographs, and donating to certain charities. When the incident occurred, Mr. McGregor was upset by the actions of certain people attending the funeral. Mr. McGregor's security detail decided it was necessary to leave to avoid unnecessary speculation and attention. So it seems like it's being painted as something that McGregor didn't cause. I think you just see that video and you get the bad feelings inside of you, considering his long history of being investigated, of legal issues over the past, 6 years or so. But I mean, I guess this one is not one you really too much of a big deal, but it's just, combine that with what I mentioned before, still no sign of Conor Chandler. It's just bringing a bad feeling inside of you, isn't it?
100% is. I mean, you look at a guy like LeBron James, who's the face of his sport, similar to the way Conor's the face of this sport. Never a scandal, never a headline in 20 years in the league, never anything like that. You look at guys like, I don't know, Derek Jeter, all these different guys, and it's just so unfortunate that the face of this sport has been in the news in the wrong way time and time and time again, way more often than he fights. Probably like freaking, 3 scandals or 3 headlines like this in between each time he gets in the cage, if not like 5 or 10 of these headlines. And it's like, on one hand, it's like, you don't know exactly what's going on. You don't know exactly what happened at this pub. You don't know if it was his fault. Part of me sometimes wants to give him the benefit of the doubt. Like someone with his status, with his stature, with his, pull and whatnot, he has so many eyes on him that anything that happens where he is, anything that, like he's always going to have all these eyes on him. He has to do everything right. It's hard. I can't imagine the pressure that people like LeBron James and other celebrities and professional athletes live under. It's crazy. So is it that he's been at the wrong place in the wrong time in some situations? Maybe. Or is it that some of this stuff is like just freaking, he's like a magnet to like these bad headlines and these bad situations? I don't know.
I made the comparison a couple of weeks ago that you think of like Mike Tyson. He bit Evander Holyfield's ear and the commission pretty much took away his license for a year. Meanwhile, McGregor has done all these things, has all these accusations. UFC and Dana White have done nothing. The Nevada Commission has done nothing. None of the commission.
I've never seen a longer release for anybody in my life. I've never seen someone get away with so many things. And this is someone who I have a soft spot for. Conor. He's right there above me. Mm-hmm. He's part of who got me in the sport. There were 3 fighters that got me into UFC, into MMA. UFC was my first love, and then all these different promotions. But it was Conor McGregor, it was Chael Sonnen, and it was Rashad Evans. Those are my 3 guys, and it's just so sad to see. Like he comes back for that first Dustin fight, he looked like a totally different guy, sounded totally different, like he had matured, like he had grown up, like we were going to see this whole new Conor for the second later stage of his career, and he just goes back and forth and back and forth. I think drug use has something to do with it. I think the spotlight and having all these eyes on him at all times has something to do with it. I can't imagine. It's hard to judge someone when you can't even possibly imagine how that life would be. But yeah, it's just unfortunate. Like the only advice I would have to him is like freaking like keep a close circle and freaking like just do what you can to stay out of stories like this.
Nate Diaz also teasing a UFC return now. So obviously next weekend he's going to fight Jake Paul. Did an interview very recently where he said, "Oh, I can fight Jake Paul, and then maybe I go to the UFC for another fight. Maybe I go for that trilogy fight with Conor McGregor." I mean, fair or foul? Like, can you see this happening, and would it be a good thing or bad thing on his part?
Fair. I think that it would be a good thing. I think that if Nick Diaz could fight again and show up in the condition he did
And
with
Nate
Robbie
could. You're
Lawler,
right.
I don't think it's going to be worse than that. I mean, that wasn't like I'm trying to be respectful. That was sad for me to see, like how how that fight ended and how it looked. It's just Nate Diaz is in a lot better condition than that. Nate Diaz, I don't think you put him with like a up and coming prospect. I know that's probably what the UFC would want to do a lot of times,
Mhm.
but like a similar fight like a Nate Diaz versus I don't know, Jim Miller or someone like that. Weight divisions there, but like just like
Yeah,
another
that'd be
veteran.
fun.
Yeah, something like that. I would do.
That
I would
would
love
be
to see
fun.
something like that. I don't think he's on the level of like
Plus,
guys
it
like
would be the last-
what were you saying?
yeah. Plus, it would be the last opportunity to get a Conor Nate free.
Yeah, no, Connor Nate trilogy makes sense too. I see Connor winning that fight, but I think that would. Connor has always said, even in recent months, like that trilogy needs to happen. It will happen, and as we can see, Connor gets what he wants when it comes to UFC and Dana White. And if he wants that trilogy to happen, if he says he needs it to happen, it'll probably happen. So I think we'll see, I think we'll see the trilogy happen. I do think we will.
But I do like that Jim Miller fight too. That would be a fun rematch. Some recent headlines, to shorter headlines to get through. Tom Aspinall returned this past weekend, getting the first round finish of Marcin Tybura. He looked great. I don't know. And like there was all this speculation of what you do now. He's claimed he wants Cyril Gane. Should Cyril Gane win in UFC Paris on September 2nd, and then he'll fight John Jones. Jones basically teased Aspinall has nothing on him. You have Sergey's name being thrown around. I think it's gonna be very interesting what you do at heavyweight. I do like the idea of Aspinall versus Cyril Gane if Gane wins at Paris.
Yeah, I like that too. Spivak, he already knocked out Spivak, so that fight doesn't really make much sense. But if Gane were to win, I would like to see that one. Definitely two up and coming, younger heavyweights. What about Pavlovich though, man? I love what Ariel Helwani said. I agree with him. I don't know if you will. I don't know. I think most people wouldn't, especially casual fans would not agree with this take. But I would rather watch Tom Aspinall versus Sergey Pavlovich right now than John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Honestly, I think it would be a more exciting competitive fight.
That's quite the take, but I do like that fight, Aspinall versus Pavlovich. The weekend before that, when we were off, Mayra Bueno Silva pulling off a shocking submission of Holly Holm. Credit in the world to Mayra Bueno Silva. She has now put herself in a really prime position to get more big fights. And I think for the UFC's sake, this is good because it pretty much solves the women's bantamweight picture for the vacant title. It would be Juliana Pena and Raquel Pennington. 1-2.
Yeah. I think Mara Bueno Silva has some star power, man. I love how she is in the mic. I like her personality. I mean, her fighting style is exciting. That pulling off that submission, the standing guillotine against Holly Holm, who we all know is a tough cookie. Shit, man. I like this girl, Bueno Silva. I would love to see her get thrown into another opportunity like the one she just got the biggest opportunity of her career, and look what she did, man. So give her another one.
For sure. This is a sad one. Zabit was in the news again, but it's not for any fights. Obviously, he's retired, and a report is that he had turned down a chance to fight Alex Volkanovski for an immediate title shot in a return. I know Zabit had injury trouble. He wonders some career-threatening surgery. He's now training to be a doctor. I think the last update I had heard before this, it's just sad. You saw him fight in November 2019 against Calvin Kattar. You think, all right, this guy's on a path. He could fight we were still waiting to see who would win between Holloway and Volkanovski the first time, that maybe he would fight one of those two, and it just never happens. It's sad. It's like good on him to have the run that he did, and good on him to go into a medical career, but it's just what could have been, basically.
My first reaction, and was a knee-jerk reaction, was like, what the heck? Like, how are you going to turn down an immediate title shot to return, especially after all these, what is it, 3 years, 4 years away? Yeah. I mean, at this point, I think we could all agree, like, it would be kind of an undeserved shot. I know he was undefeated. What was he, 4-0 in the UFC? Maybe 5-0, but something like that.
Yeah, like 4, 5, 6-0.
Yeah. Back then, like, of course, but like it would at this juncture, like, would he be more deserving than even like a Brian Ortega or a Max Holloway, who I know they both lost the vote, but no, he wouldn't. But then after giving it some thought and being a little bit smarter and not being like, what the heck, it just shows where his priorities are at. He's not prioritizing fighting. He probably has family. He had injuries, multiple injuries. I think some injuries that people didn't even know about. It wasn't just like some physical stuff. It was some internal stuff with him. So, it sucks to see, but he's still cornering guys in Bellator. He's still within the sport. He's still, helping the younger guys out. So still a big fan of his.
For sure. Another one that we missed because of the off week, Chelsea Chandler put a little tease out there about those Ronda Rousey return rumors saying, oh, she'll return, but she'll return at featherweight. And it's like, okay, the UFC thinking, okay, Amanda Nunes is gone, but Ronda Rousey can be the face of that no people in your division. But Ariel Helwani thankfully stepped in, said, not true. Even if Ronda does leave WWE after SummerSlam next weekend, she is not looking for a comeback. And it's like what I said when Zain and I were talking about the story. I mean, what point is there for Ronda to return? And she can't return in as short of fashion as these rumors were saying, after being away for so long. The game has passed her by. She has her place in the sport, but it's passed her by.
I don't need to say much. Everything you said is correct. Of course, we trust Ariel Helwani's words over Chelsea Chandler. No offense, Chelsea. You're a great fighter. It just doesn't make sense. I don't even think Ronda is giving it any thought. I don't know if she is. I can't speak for it. I don't have any inside info. But what you said was perfect. The game has passed her by. The game is different now. The amount people have improved. These younger people coming up. Like calf kicks probably weren't even around when she was fighting. I don't know. Like it just doesn't really make much sense. I wouldn't see her having much success against the top contenders in the division, especially how her tenure ended in the UFC. She's making so much money probably in WWE. Probably doesn't even have to work again if she didn't, it doesn't make sense. I don't think it will happen.
No. Last story here, and we actually kind of go full circle back to your Bellator story because there was a certain guest there in the UFC London crowd, Michael Venom Page, who apparently is now a free agent. And, for all we talk about the UFC profiles, nothing matters there. Kind of a little flirtation between the UFC and Michael Page, just like there was after Michael Chandler left Bellator a couple of years ago. So, I mean, could you see Michael Venom Page in the UFC? I know people have said in the MMA community about, his can-crushing ways. I mean, he fought for interim Bellator title. Some people thought he should be an interim Bellator champion. I think I think somebody with the explosive knockout power that Michael Venom Page has, Dana would take a big liking to him.
Not only could I see him be in the UFC, I can almost guarantee I think he will be. I think he will definitely, by the end of this year, probably even earlier, he will be announced as the newest signing of the UFC. I like the signing. I think he's a good fighter. I like Johnny Parsons calling him out, saying he wants to do a striking battle with him. I think that would be a fun first fight for him. I'll be completely honest, respectfully, I don't think he could hang with the grapplers in the division. I think he'd get out wrestled by a lot of different people. We've seen him get out wrestled pretty badly in Bellator, especially by Logan Storley in that interim title fight. Logan Storley is a great wrestler, though, so not taking much away from Michael Venom Page for that one. But he's more of an exciting striker. You put him in matches like Stephen Thompson versus Holland or Stephen Thompson versus Michel Pereira, stuff like that. It would just be I don't see him, making a title run in the UFC at this stage in his career, but it would be a fun signing, have some fun fights, make some money. I think it would be beneficial for both parties.
Amen. Perfect. Dylan, thank you so much for joining me on this portion of episode 47. It's good to have you on, man. It was absolutely fun. Again, fire article that you did, and hopefully we get more appearances from you on this show.
Of course, man. Anytime. You guys are doing things right. I love to be here. I love to talk about it. You and Zain are doing great things for this sport. Keep making the Young Journalist Coalition of America proud. That's what I say. We're the Young MMA Journalist Coalition of America. Yeah, bro. Anytime, man. This is a great show. I really enjoy being on this.
Thank you. And one last time, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty Bench Network, every MMA Outsiders episode and more. Again, I'm Tom Bando. You can find my work over at Fansided MMA and with Professional Fighters League. Follow me on X, not Twitter. Thanks, Elon. At Thomas J. Albano. Again, to my right, sitting with me as the guest host spot this week, Dylan Rush. Follow him at Rush MMA 11 across social media over at Cageside Press. Follow his work. And make sure to follow the Empty the Bench Network across social media at ETB Network. If you are on our audio-only platforms, Acast, Stitcher is on my mind because they're closing Stitcher now, but iHeart, Spotify, and more. Make sure to go over to the video side, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube feed on our normal home. We're at 421 subscribers now. Right now, we're on that path to 500. So keep supporting the network. We thank you all out there. And again, thank you to Dylan for joining me today. Make sure to tune in next week for episode 48, where Zain and I will be doing all the recapping of the July 29th madness. And then, of course, previewing the Nate Diaz-Jake Paul fight. So for Dylan and the absent Zain, I'm Tom. See you next week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, guys.